and even sex was more enjoyable when didn't have all these expectations of how sex is supposed to be, right? A B C D E F G H I J K L M N O P Q R S T U V W X Y Z. Yo, what's up? So this is day number 18 of filming myself every day for the next 30 days to build consistency and discipline when it comes to communicating and articulating my thoughts in a compelling and concise manner. And today I just wanted to share with you 5 brutally honest relationship advice that I've learned over the past decade. Okay. Now, the reason I wanted to share this is because I feel that I have a duty to speak to my former self. And if anyone is going through this, I hope that me sharing my thoughts and what I've been through over the years can help you navigate this world of dating, especially in today's age as well. Okay. So before I continue, I'd like to ask you to like and subscribe to this channel, and it'll help me a ton when it comes to spreading this type of information to other gents out there as well. Okay. So I appreciate the like and subscribe, and let's get on to it. Now, as far as my backstory is concerned, I have been in multiple serious relationships with women, right? And over the years, obviously, it hasn't been easy, but I've gained quite a number of experiences and I've gained wisdom, or so to speak. So, my longest relationship that I've ever had came when I was in college. So, fast forward to now, obviously, I'm no longer with this woman, but my longest relationship has been for about 8 years or so. And after that, I got into a relationship that lasted 3 months, weirdly enough. So, from being in a long ass relationship to being in a short ass relationship, it was it's funny just thinking about it right now. Okay. And after a series of dates, obviously, I met a chick that I had a serious relationship with, and that lasted for about a year and a half to 2 years. Granted, majority of the relationship was sort of long distance, right? So if you want a backstory on that, I could probably give later on. Just drop a comment in the comment section box below, and I could expand on that later. But fast forward to today, I'm in a happy relationship with my wife, and I don't want to put too much details in here about my relationship, but the point is that through the power of communication, through the power of understanding myself and my standards, I've been able to navigate the dating scene and find the ideal woman for me, right? Because ultimately that's the goal, right? And I could go on on a tangent about how the red pill community preaches about sleeping with multiple women, how it's hard to find good women nowadays. There's some slight truth to that, but ultimately, as a man, you have a purpose to fulfill, right? And you can't find that purpose, which is something I'm going to expand on later on. You can't find that purpose if you constantly chase women, or if you spend your youth chasing women. And that's something that I did, right? And it brings me to the first point that I learned, okay? And that is I decided for me personally to break the chain of chasing tail, okay? Now, what do I mean by that? I get it. We all have an unspoken borough code or man code to fulfill almost. And it's preached about in the red pill community to sleep with as many women as you want, to gain that experience, or so to speak, right? And I suppose there is some truth to that, although I'd say I'd say you find that balance because I get it. It's in our nature to procreate, right? We can bust nuts till the day that we die, right? Although a few exceptions out there, obviously get ED, right? But uh, back to my point is that we're filled with testosterone. I get that, and I, for one, enjoyed fucking around, sleeping around, living the whole rock and roll lifestyle of sex, drugs, and alcohol. Although, considering where I was from, drugs wasn't exactly prevalent, but sex and drugs, right? And getting that dopamine of attention and the thrill of messing around back when I was in a relationship, it it was all meaningless, right? I realized how meaningless and how instantly gratifying it was that it almost programmed my brain to seek these things out. And let me tell you in a second why that is dangerous, right? So, we have as men societal expectations, again, going back to the red pill community, of how it's okay for us to fuck around, but it's not okay for women to fuck around, right? And to an extent, that is true because for the majority of men, sex is just sex, right? But when you realize that you are exchanging energy, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the people in the red pill community are going to come after me after the, they're going to come after me for this because they don't tell you about the sexual energy that you exchange from a spiritual perspective. Okay. Because of our experiences as human beings, we basically get used to fucking multiple chicks, and it clouds our judgment, it clouds our purpose, and we get addicted to that lust, right? Not only that, we objectify women. Granted, that's our instinctual nature, right? But when you look at it from an external perspective, you realize that it's all just a dopamine hit. It's all just as addictive as carbs or sugar, right? But anyways, I don't want to get all scientific and stuff with this, right? But I realized that you can practice getting confident and game, and you can practice your verbal Jedi almost, or your verbal mastery without having to fuck around, right? And when I realized this, I was like, fuck, all this time I was having that goal of, I was setting that goal of getting laid. And it was it was a skewed perception, and I realized that, right? So what I did was essentially set mini goals of talking to people, and this allowed me to not be as awkward as I was, right? It allowed me to realize that conversations don't have to be so serious all the time. Conversations can be flirty. Granted, you got some crazies out there that take shit seriously and that take banter out of proportion, but that's a whole nother fucking story, right? So to bring it back full circle, I realized that exercising sexual temperance and being able to control my need to fuck made me realize how abundant life is when you don't need to bust the nut all the time, right? And it also made me realize that I can say no to temptation. And that's something powerful as a man that I learned, right? And it kind of brings me back to the next thing I learned, which is the ultimate power of being able to communicate. And going back to being a verbal Jedi, now I'm going to take you back to my longest relationship, right? Because I realized how stupid and how I lacked the communication skills to set my boundaries early on in the relationship. I was young and stupid. I was immature, right? I I saw things from an emotional standpoint far too often, and it granted it lasted long as it did. It was it was destined to fail, right? Because I didn't have that communication under my tool belt. And I get it. As guys, we're taught to suppress our emotions, right? We're taught to be stoic at all times, and to a certain degree, that is true. But you have to understand as a human being that we have feelings too, right? And I'm saying this because you have to realize as a man that you can express your emotions without being emotional, right? And let me extrapolate on that further, right? There's a difference between acting on our feelings, for example, crying when we're sad, hitting people or hitting fucking walls, or I'm only saying that because I did that, but lashing out and going on a fucking tirade because you're pissed or you're angry. There's a difference between that and actually expressing and talking about how you feel in a calm and collect manner. Because the reason I say this is I learned that being aware of my feelings was the most powerful thing that I could do on top of sexual temperance, right? And when I learned to differentiate my feelings from my identity and from my own self, and just when I learned to observe my feelings from a distance, I realized that I had more patience, right? I I was able to control my emotions and assess them through logic and just figuring out the best way to control them, right? And as a result of this, my communication got better, right? We often come from a place of blame as opposed to expression because more oftentimes than not, it's the person attacking us that we tend to associate with, right? And we play the blame game and we think that we're communicating our feelings when in fact we're just on the offense and telling them how they did this, how they did that, right? And the more you're aware of this, the more you realize that you're actually not communicating, right? And I realized that there's that distinct difference, right? I realized when I acknowledged my feelings and actually communicated from a level of understanding, I saw that it was effectively received and it moved my relationship forward, right? In theory, we're teaching the lady that we're in a relationship with what triggers us as opposed to blaming them, okay? And I'm pretty sure I'm already expecting the Red Pill community to give me a whole lot of shit about not expressing your emotions to women. But the thing is, if you don't express or if you don't say what triggers you, if you don't communicate, it's like saying, "Oh, you this student is going to go to school, but the teacher's not going to fucking tell them what's 1 plus 1." How the fuck is a student going to know what 1 plus 1 is if you don't communicate what 1 plus 1 is, right? So, that's the power of communication, right? You don't have to you can express your emotions without expressing them, right? And if you break those components down, you'll understand what I mean, right? And so this goes back to telling chicks how you feel, but in reality, you're not telling them how you feel. You're setting your boundaries, and this is a significant distinction, right? Now, if you haven't yet, I'd like to take this time to have a break and ask you to join my completely free newsletter. And it's down in the description box below. And I break down all the things that I know about intersexual dynamics and game and just leveling up as a man in 2024 and beyond. So click the link in the description box below, and I'll see you on the inside. And this brings me to the third point that I learned over the years, right? If you have certain boundaries, right? And if a woman is consistently testing your boundaries, right? I learned that it may just be time to leave that relationship. And I know it's hard. I know it's probably easier said than done because at that point you probably built some sort of relationship and some sort of growing to like this person or going to even possibly growing to love this person, right? And let me just give you a backstory about how I learned this, right? So, again, going back to my previous relationship with my ex, is that I opened up to her, right? I was granted, it wasn't exactly the right way to open up, but I opened up to her and I told her about how I grew up, how I was raised, how I got my ass whooped, right? And I wasn't able to communicate that set of information in a form of a boundary. Now, what do I mean by this? So I told my ex that I grew up and my parents were abusive, quote unquote, right? Now, it's obviously an arbitrary term. Abusive could mean a lot of things, but that's besides the point. I told her that my parents were abusive, and because I didn't communicate that in the form of a boundary, she didn't realize that whenever she would get pissed off, she would bring up the fact that I got my ass whooped because of the way that I was by my parents. And her bringing that up just kind of triggered something in me, right? I lost respect for her because she used that information against me, right? And I never saw her the same. And that essentially caused us to drift apart. Now, that was obviously a learning lesson for me. And it brings me back to my point of, if a woman constantly tests your boundaries, then it may just be time to leave, right? And I learned through those experiences that having preferences isn't a bad thing, right? On top of that, just let me just give you an example of one of my preferences, right? I'm not into masculine women or women that behave in a masculine manner, that exhibit aggressive traits, aggressive tendencies, or A type personalities or tendencies, right? And it's just a preference, right? And the reason I don't like that is because it stirs something in me. It brings out the drive in me almost to compete. It brings out the ego in me, right? Granted, it you could probably say it emasculates me, but fuck, it kind of brings me back to what Andrew Tate was saying about never has there been once in the history of men did a dude say, "Oh, you're too nice. You're too agreeable. Get the fuck out of here. I want some disagreeable bitch," right? Like, if anything, I can probably confidently say that if you're being pushed around, and I realize this, that most oftentimes a man that's pushed around by their chick is A, not respected, right? On both ends, from society and from their lady, right? And B, more oftentimes than not, they're probably cucks or simps, right? And as a man, it's ultimately up to you and your tolerance level for this type of fuckery, right? And it brings me back again full circle that communicating your boundaries, at least for me, it was a foundation for my relationship, right? And so this kind of ties in to my fourth point of what I learned from being in a relationship over the past decade. And it's that my hierarchy of status directly influenced my options of women. Now, what do I mean by that? Right? Let me give you an example. A bum or a junkie that goes through life doing whatever the fuck they want, being fat as fuck, unattractive from a societal perspective, versus a blue collar or a white collar working man that is relatively in shape and that is hygienic and that always has his shit together, right? What type of woman do you think those kind of guys would attract, right? If you break it down to its bare bones, you'll realize that your environment shapes a person's perspective and perception of you, right? And the more I dated on top of the relationships that I've been with, the more I realized that I would never excel if I hadn't been in those situations, right? To put it frankly, my longest relationship, going back to the beginning of the video, my longest relationship, I met her in college, right? Because I was in college. The shortest relationship that I was with, I met her in the gym. Because I was in the gym, I met that MILF, right? Now, my third relationship, I met her in a corporate slash professional setting, right? And I wouldn't have met this office chick if I wasn't in that particular situation, right? As far as networking is concerned, I wouldn't have met her if it weren't for my connections, right? And my current wife, I met her because I put myself out there, right? This kind of ties in with being able to communicate, being able to put yourself out there and just explore overall, right? And I get it. It kind of, in essence, they say that a man objectifies a woman, but in reality, it kind of goes both ways because you'll never see, more oftentimes than not, you'll never see a woman that is relatively attractive or above average getting it with a bum, right? So, that being said, when I realized how my looks affected the types of women that I got, I began to dress better. I began to fix myself and my physique, right? And obviously, the better you look, the better you feel. And the better you feel, the better energy you put out there in terms of attracting the person that you want, right? So it kind of brings me to my last and final point of what I learned is that when you attract the person that you want, you have to realize and you have to almost subconsciously reprogram your brain that when you reach a point of intimacy with this person, you can't fuck like how porn stars do it, right? And the biggest misconception that's not talked often is that the shit you see online is extremely, if not dangerously, unrealistic, right? And I want to expand on this because the standards online aren't real, right? If you think of it, not everyone has 10 fucking inch mandingos, right? And it just fucking gives you a skewed perception of what it means to make love, quote unquote, right? And I get it. There's probably like kinks and desires or sexual fantasies out there, but it's it's something that you learn over time, right? And what I'm meaning to say is that once you get that out of your head, and I know this because I've lived through it, right? I realized that porn was clouding my judgment. It trained my brain to objectify women, right? And I realized how crazy the actual reality is once I got over that hurdle. And I realized that porn, all it did was made me see attractive women as intimidating. And that fucked up my entire perception, right? So I realized that and I was like, holy shit, that's what porn was doing. And I decided enough was enough, right? And I realized that the connection I had with the person that I was with, right, was more enjoyable. And even sex was more enjoyable when I didn't have all these expectations of how sex is supposed to be, right? And in reality, hell, if you even look at biology, right, the G spot is 3 inches inside the uteral wall. But this is not a fucking biology class. So I hope this video gave you some sort of perspective when it comes to navigating your world in your relationship. And let me know what you think, right? Drop a comment in the comment section below. Let's start a conversation, and I will see you tomorrow for day number 19.